Let's go back.
Roll them.
Okay, where are you?
I'm in Los Angeles.
What's the weather like?
It is, well, I'll show you later. I'll take you outside, but it's crystal blue skies, but it's freezing cold. It's like 65 degrees.
Oh, man, that's awful.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That wasn't supposed to be snarky. But for us, we get soft out here.
And you're doing a lot of Zoom stuff because you're teaching?
Yes.
How's it going?
It's functional. No, that's not fair either. It's going. In terms of dealing with like faculty stuff, that's really effective because we're all kind of in the same boat. But when it comes to teaching, I don't know if you guys have started doing it via Zoom yet. It's teaching ceramics via Zoom is ridiculous, right? And with for my classes, the advanced students. I know them really well. I've been working with them for 3 years or so. So I know their personalities. I can read them through Zoom, and I can, kind of task them to set up studios at home, and giving them a lot of freedom as to what they want to make, right? But for the beginning level students and the non-majors, that's the real challenge. I mean, half of them couldn't even take clay home. None of them have access to facilities. And they're all non-majors, right? This was their fun class, and the fun thing about it is gone, right? And so, I don't know what it's like in your situation, but like I'm teaching these accountants how to make pinch pots. 2/3 of the way through the semester, we should be over that, right? So you really have to think, kind of funnel ceramics down to its fundamentals and try to figure out what a kid who doesn't know much about the material can make on a kitchen table and have an experience.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we're sort of in a similar situation teaching community classes where they ended like kind of towards the end of the semester.
Right.
And so, but the same thing, like a lot of people weren't able to take clay. A lot of people don't have access to facilities. So instead, that's why we're trying to do a bunch of these like studio visits, because if they can't work with the material, at least they can learn about how people work with it. And hopefully, when everyone's back in the studio soon, everyone will be like a little bit better off.
And then we'll have to answer like 1,000 questions.
Yeah.
What was he talking about? Like, oh, I don't know what I don't know. What time? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was, we were already 2 weeks away from the wet deadline, so we're already looking at the end of the semester. And so they were, in one way, it's good because they were 70% of the work was done. So in terms of curriculum, it's pretty close to being okay. But in terms of, that's the boring stuff, right? In terms of actual experience, like they're not going to get to glaze their work, right, in a real way. And, for all our majors, they're going to be around next year anyways. That's, we'll get their stuff glazed, but for these non-majors, this was their one shot. And we're certainly going to open up the studio to them if they want to kind of finish their work. But, they leave a place like USC, they go travel around the world, and, they're not likely they'll be back. And that's, it's just kind of a drag,
Yeah, I feel like as an educator, usually, like my classes, I don't know, I can't speak for everyone else, but I feel like all the classes we have like kind of a party at the end, and it's like you have like a sense of camaraderie and you show all your work, and there's like you have that sense of closure where I don't think we're getting that. And so I'm like, do I email them and say like how do you end?
That was fun.
I mean, it's like you like spend so much time with people, and then you're like, okay, well, we just broke up.
Yeah.
We broke up over coronavirus. You're happy.
Yeah, and some people still want to linger after the breakup, and some people want nothing to do with you, but it just gets a little, and you have to negotiate 20 romances, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, tell us a little bit about your background.
That's a broad question.
It's big. Let's start big.
First things first, do you two know each other? In the real world?
Okay. Well, we met in 1998. Yep. I think I showed you around Cranbrook when you were a prospective student. We probably hung out for like 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, I think we went to lunch. She took me down to like drove me down to 8 Mile and said, "This is the road you don't want to cross."
Oh yeah, because it really wasn't. And then we never spoke again.
Yeah. Well, I think we saw each other at Tony's thing
Oh, maybe.
somewhere.
But then we became really fierce opponents on Words with Friends.
Right.
For about a year.
Yeah. And she's killing me right now.
So we've been like, we just have this ongoing game where I think we're equal. Like we're really.
That's a really amazing thing.
It's actually, I have to say, like something like that, like with our relationships, I mean, you know, we've met, we've been friendly, we have a ton of mutual friends, but obviously we live on the other side of the country. And like Words with Friends becomes an interesting kind of offshoot of social media, and a way to kind of reconnect. It's pretty cool, actually. But yeah, so we know each other basically. Yeah, she was my tour guide at Cranbrook in 1998, a few years ago. So yeah, I went to Cranbrook for graduate school thanks to this amazing tour. But before, like, you know, I'm a little bit complicated. I grew up moving around the world. My parents are European, but my dad was a chef actually, and so because of his job, I was born in South Africa. We moved a bunch of places in the U.S. We lived back in Switzerland and Germany, where my family's from. And then just before high school, we moved to Seattle, and that's where my mom decided we're not moving around anymore. So Seattle is kind of home for me. So I went to high school and college there. I went to University of Washington, and just kind of fell into the ceramics program just because it was the best program in the art school. The teachers were the coolest, the most interesting. They gave us a lot of freedom. What I didn't know, it was one of the, at the time considered one of the strongest programs in the country. So I felt really, in hindsight, I was like, man, I was lucky. I'm not sure if I would have done ceramics in another program or without that program. It was a good fit for me. And those faculty and also the graduate students that they would pull in were, some of the best graduate school students in the country. And they were, because they choose a program like that, they're pretty, unusual in terms of ceramics. And Washington kind of, that program, how should I say, placed itself kind of at the edges of ceramics at the time and considered itself kind of irreverent towards the field and the material. I didn't know that. That was the norm for me. So like being on the fringes was the center.
So Anders and I grew up in North Dakota, but we have a bunch of family in Seattle. We're brothers, by the way.
Hello.
And
I'm jealous of your history. I wanted to go to University of Washington because we were like born there, and that was to me that was like the most experience I had in a city that had a lot of good art going on.
But even as high school students, like we were aware of the reputation that the University of Washington, especially their ceramics department, had.
I remember like we went and looked, and they had like a Blau before I'd ever seen one, and I was just like, this is the future right here.
Why didn't you go?
I guess
Look at his face. He's like, why didn't I?
I tried to get like as close as possible to Seattle, but I didn't know that I was like for sure going to do ceramics. So I ended up in Tacoma at like a small private school, and then it just became, I was able to move. So we grew up like close to Minneapolis. Right. So I was able to get really cheap tuition at the University of Minnesota.
It's a great program.
Yeah, and things have changed like pretty recently there, but like I still got to study with Mark Ferris, which was really cool, and like so I got good facilities and everything, but as far as just being like totally blown away by what the department was doing, the University of Washington did that first. Yeah.
I love that. I mean, like I said, I feel lucky. I mean, I think like, I went to the University of Washington because it was the school down the street from my house. It's like in those days where, you just go to the big university.
Yeah.
I didn't know I was going to do art, to totally date myself. It was, the 90s in Seattle that's what I was in college, was actually a pretty cool time to be there. And yeah, and I was, I think I liked the department. I don't know if, you can say rebellious and ceramics in the same sentence, but I guess relative to ceramics it was. And I just loved the sense of irreverence. But again, that was just the norm there. It wasn't until I left that place and actually started teaching where I realized my background was strange or unusual, and that ceramics was, and this is not meant to be a negative word, but ceramics is generally conservative. And for me, being not that was, and not politically, but just kind of philosophically, and being not that was kind of my starting point. And so ultimately Cranbrook was, and that time and that moment was the perfect fit for me. And Tony Hepburn was the perfect fit for me because I chose the school, A, because of Tony, and B, just kind of this overall, and again, at the time it was unique, this interdisciplinary kind of program that was, I'm sure you all know the shtick, 100% studio-based. I was kind of over taking classes and jumping through hoops, even though UW was pretty flexible. I just wanted to make my work, and I really wanted to be challenged on the basis of my ideas. And Cranbrook at the time was a perfect spot. And I wasn't even sure if I would if I would be making or working with clay when I was done. And that's the first question I asked Tony, and he was, you make it's all about your art. And I remember he says, if you end up making clay just because it's easy or it's comfortable, you're doing it wrong. You use the material that's best for your ideas. And that was, for me, the best pitch, and ultimately made me more interested in ceramics because I had to really kind of dive deeper into what it was about. And then, so I did that. And then actually I went back to Seattle for a year and then came down here to LA. And I had, I knew I wanted to live in a major art center. I didn't, I thought about LA, New York, or Europe. And in those days, not many people were coming here, so I wanted to come here. I thought I would stay for 3 to 5 years and then go on to the next adventure. What is it, 19 years later, job, house, wife, kid, all that stuff. And I guess I'm staying. So yeah, fast forward 20 years and here we all are together.
Wow. Just really quick, I just really want to know, who did you get to work with at University of Washington? And then we want to see your studio, but I'm really curious.
Yeah, I got to say I was there at a sweet spot. It was Patty Warshina, Jamie Walker, and Akio Takamori had just got hired. And I actually got, I didn't know anything about ceramics. I didn't know that he was a big deal. But he was so I got to know him as just an incredible teacher and kind of human being. And so that was my faculty. And then right when I graduated, actually, or not right away, but shortly thereafter, I did a summer workshop at Alfred with Doug Jeck and Stephen DeStabler right before Doug came to Seattle to teach at UW. And I was, I stayed in Seattle for 3 or 4 years before I went to Cranbrook. And so I got to connect with him as faculty as well. So I feel like I got kind of the best of all the great faculty there during my time. So again, I just feel super lucky to have stepped in that place at the right moment in time. That's a huge list, like a monster list, like, wow. And I feel, again, like in hindsight, kind of getting more of a sense of the ceramics world and also the ceramics world within the art world. What I loved about that faculty is, even though they were, I'll just say well-known artists in the field, they were all really cool. They were great role models. They just showed us how to be artists, and they treated us like grown-ups. And if we were serious, then they took us seriously. And they would, if I was there at, midnight working and Akio was in the studio, he would wander by and say, "Hey, what you're doing?" We didn't have to be, in classes. It was definitely a community. And again, in hindsight, I realized how incredibly that's not normal, or that's not the typical. And I feel really fortunate for that.
So tell us what you're working on. Show us what you're working on.
Okay.
What's happening there now?
So I don't know how much you know about my work. I mean, mostly, so up till actually recently, I've been making kind of really installation-based work. Well, why don't I show you around, and then
Great.
you can see a few things, and then maybe we can talk about what I'm doing, because I haven't quite wrapped my head around what I'm doing yet, so that's why I'm.
Great. We'll walk you through it.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll
It's like a therapy session. So my studio situation, I'm pretty fortunate, but it's also a little weird. So I actually work at home and also at the studio at school, where you know, kilns, glazes kind of can spread out when the students are in there, of course. And of course now I don't get to use that studio. But we bought this house a few years ago because we got a studio at home. And so it's a kind of a big giant, our house is like a Brady Bunch house, right? It's like 1965, 2 living rooms, 5 bedrooms, right? It was a total fixer-upper when we bought it, and we do not need 5 bedrooms. But we realized, before I show you around the way the house is laid out, a third of the house could be the studio, right? And then and then the rest of the house is just a normal 2 or 3 bedroom house for a regular family. And so it was a really good fit. The only way we could get the house was because it was a total fixer-upper. And we haven't done the studio yet, but it's good enough to work. So that being said, so yeah.
Really quick, we have a question. How far away is home from school? Because we know like LA is driving.
Oh yeah, that's a great. LA is different. I mean, you know, if I left today during coronavirus, you know, month, I can get to school in 15 minutes, which is pretty great, right? However, if I'm teaching a 9 o'clock class in the morning, it'll take me about 35 minutes to get there, which in LA is not too bad, right? It's about 7 miles, but we don't do things in miles here. It's all time. So yeah, but relative, I mean, we live, you know, if you know LA, we live just northeast of downtown, and USC is kind of on the south end of downtown. To give you some context. I'm going to do this with a computer. So just shout if this doesn't make sense. So this is basically my drawing room. And I kind of, you know, I have kind of room to put work up on the walls, get some nice natural light, you know, just kind of drawing table.
Go a little slower.
Oh, are you getting dizzy?
Yeah, pan really slow.
Okay. I don't want you guys to get nauseous.
Yeah.
So just kind of books and storage.
Is that all Helvetica?
Yes, Helvetica Bold, 500 point or 1,000 point. Very good. My wife's a graphic designer. That's where some of this work, she is one of my sources of info. So yeah, mostly just draw, and then I'll kind of look at things and kind of do kind of repairs and things like that in here. So the beauty of it is, again, why we like the space is that it connects right up to the garage.
Oh, wow.
Which is, I'm trying to go slow. You know, it's a garage. You know, so multiple working stations, like, you know, obviously we don't use it for parking cars unless we're out of town. And just, you know, storage, you know, small work table, molds, and then bigger work table, right? Camping / apocalypse gear. Outside, so that's kind of the view.
Oh my God, that looks so LA. I can't even.
So yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Go back.
It's all real. I don't know. Let's see.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, Cami, like you said, I'm working with Helvetica, so I have molds for every letter in the alphabet. So all the work is slip cast.
Wow.
So that's about half of them.
How are you making the originals?
So when I first started doing this work, at this point quite a while ago, I would make the originals out of foam.
Okay.
So just like cut them out on a bandsaw, and then they're lined with silicone and just make molds from that. And it was fine. But then I did the European Ceramic Work Center. And one of the things I did, I don't know if this will translate, is I remade them all on the CNC milling machine, right? So they're all, so we just cut them right in. We made them on Rhino and then just cut them right into the plaster.
Yeah.
So what I wanted, because I wanted to start from a point of perfection, right? So they're as clean as they possibly can be when they start, and then mess with them from there. But then I have, these are actually some of the crates from Work Center.
How long ago?
Now these are all just cast forms. So if I want to do an installation or spell out, you know, whatever, I can just reach in here and I have a bunch of this stuff all made, right? So it's like, I don't know, a couple hundred letters in there.
When were you out there?
2013.
Okay.
Yeah, so a little while ago. And this is some work. This is, so also give you kind of context. My wife, Alex, also Cranbrook alum. She's a designer. We did the EKWC as a collaborative, which didn't quite work out. You know, the idea was that I'd been working with this text-based work, and she's an actual designer. It'd be kind of interesting to see, like, if we, you know, obviously we're in the same room together, but we've never made art together. And the collaboration didn't quite work as we intended, but what we ended up doing, and this was super organic, is she would kind of help me with my work and kind of counsel. And then she just started making her own line of functional wear. Maybe the light's bad from that view. So like this kind of stuff, right? And she'd never done any clay or ceramics before, but she, you know, she got really interested in making functional wear. And so I helped her with that. And that's something that we still do to this day. So I'll come back and show you what I'm doing now, but I'll show you a little bit more. And so from the garage, this is super weird. Is it weird for you? It's weird for me.
It's really fun.
So there's Alex's office. So this is kind of just a big open space.
This is like, I'm so unexpected. I was like, where is he going? Oh, just to his home gallery.
Yeah, sort of, yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. So this is actually the space where I'll look at work, right? And like I said, you know, this piece is maybe a year or two old now, but I can pull it out into the space and kind of see how, because I'm doing installations, I see how the work feels in space, right? And then just kind of see how work will relate to space, right? If that makes sense. Yeah. And I'll just, like, this is like where we actually live. That's super old work for me, the elephants on the tomatoes. But Alex said she doesn't want the public too much in her house. So, so yeah, it's a total, you know, like I said, that's one of the reasons we bought the house, is because we could really spread out. There's our pandemic stockpile.
Nice. Great.
Looking a little sparse.
I know, you're telling me. And then outside, this is for, like, I mean, it's a junky old table, but, you know, when the weather's decent, I do my mold making and sanding and kind of super, super messy work out here.
Wow.
And this kind of, I don't know, it's just a table outside.
I love
but
how
again,
you have,
it's
like,
kind
letters,
of the luxury of space.
We have, like, letters hidden. There's, like, letters hidden everywhere.
Oh, yeah. You know,
like,
sometimes they'll, you know, figure out what to do with them eventually.
Totally.
Yeah, so, like, and then the reason we really love the space was, you know, the quote unquote studio space, all of this space kind of lines up nicely. And it's, even though it's part of the house, it's physically separated from our living space, right? That makes sense. And that's it, that's the tour.
Thank you so much. We have a comment from Jen she says, great tour. Love the home gallery. It's so great to go on vacation to LA. This is really true.
Welcome, it's nice to go on vacation with you.
You use a lot of text in your work, and I use a lot of text too, but I feel like our relationships with language is completely different. Can you want to talk a little bit about, like, how you go about making those decisions?
Can you go first?
No, how I do it?
Yeah.
Well, I think my work is based mostly in, like, memoir and sort of random poetics, where I'm constantly like hooked onto specific words that I have like a personal relationship to the word itself and also the meaning. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes I get stuck in like a couple alliterative words or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the way they sound or
yeah,
feel.
Yeah. But I use it like as like a very, very, very short diary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know for me it was, I've been doing it for a long time, but I feel like I still just started. But basically since Cranbrook, actually, my primary interest in art was the ephemeral or time-based work and installations, things that work in space. So I was doing, can I show you some older images just to kind of give you a sense?
That would be great.
And then I'll loop back around. I pulled up this. Let's see.
Oh, wow. Cool. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, I won't do my whole shtick, but I'll give you the sense of it. So like this kind of thing, right? An installation, cinder blocks on orange. So again, not necessarily ceramics, but these things, balance them like they're going to float, but of course they don't. And then slowly over time it collapses, right? And it gets flattened. Same kind of thing, right? And it's about, again, the passage of time, right? I love this work that I just showed you, right? So this is an unfired clay elephant sitting on a real tomato. And then I would work with a product photographer. This was shortly after I got here, and we would take this glamour shot and then show the whole thing together, right? So the thing would decompose and crumble. But so what was really interesting to me, I love the absurdity of it. I love the materiality. I love the photos. But what was really interesting to me was kind of this capturing of time, right? Here's another one. Right, so all these, so this is just a piece that floats through space and through time, right? And then I had done, years ago, I had done this residency, in Holland, not the EKWC, but in Rotterdam, called Cows. And I was really thinking about, in terms of your question to the language, I knew my work was going to take a shift. I actually thought I thought I was going to completely leave ceramics, even though I was teaching it at that time. But I was thinking about, what can I do? What can I make? I know I have this interest. It's kind of, you have to make something to talk about nothing, right? And then it really struck me that, the question that came is what's more ephemeral than language itself, right? So I wanted to, I wonder if I can make this thing that's actually nothing and kind of objectify and give material to language, right? And so initially I'd made, I'll be right back.
It's appropriate.
So when I was at this residency, I actually started making them out of paper, like watercolor paper. Oh. Again, because at that residency, I didn't have any access to materials, but I realized that ceramics was actually a perfect medium to do this body of work in, because I could work in multiples. I could make them clean and perfect. I could, have my touch all over it. And what I wanted to talk about was this kind of idea of language failing, right? So, like, for example, typography has a baseline, right? So I didn't account for the baseline. And so all these letters look actually a little bit wrong. Like, it drives kind of graphic designers look crazy because these E's are floating and these D's are floating. And then I wouldn't account for things that couldn't hold themselves up, and they would let them shatter, right? And they would all have these colored colors on the inside. So it was really about this idea of taking the literal, a word, and letting it collapse to talk about an abstraction. So shifting the literal to the abstract and doing that through language. So to answer your really long answer to your question, Kim, it's language is really a vessel to talk about the ephemeral, right? And to kind of give substance to something that's not a thing and then let it disappear again, right? But I had to make that, again, I had to make something to talk about nothing.
Wow. And
so, and the kind of the next level to that is, like you said, this kind of sense of poetics is like, the minute you start using language, language is loaded. it instantly has content, right? And when I actually want to talk about these other things, when I say a word, it implies something else, right? So that for me, became the really interesting challenge to balance those things out.
Right. I also feel like with language, you can't, like, once the language becomes an object, you can't take it back. Like, you've said it.
Right.
You've said it in a way that's like, you really have to commit to it.
Yes.
So I'm
That's
really,
a real commitment.
yeah. I mean, I'm really, really careful about, what I say, you know what I mean? What I want to identify with as,
Right.
as like which, any writer or poet would be like, yeah, that's normal. But as like a visual artist, like I labor over every word like a writer. And
Yeah. And
as a writer.
Yeah, totally. Not that writers and writing is not memorialized on the page or in the digital space. There's something about when you make sculpture out of it, just having that physical heft, that commitment to that word or that phrase is more intense. And for me, I don't consider even though I'm working with language, I don't consider myself a writer.
Right.
And it becomes a little bit more daunting. And so it becomes a really interesting challenge, right? So it's kind of forever, like for me, this body of work, I've been in it so long because there's so many different challenges to deal with in terms of technical stuff, right? Like making the molds, getting the glazes to fit. And then, then the formalities and the aesthetics of an installation. And then what do you actually say? And then what does it mean when that thing that you say falls apart, right? When this thing starts to collapse, right? Because that brings another layer of meaning, right? And then some of them I did, where are they? Right, so this piece is on a mound of unfired porcelain, right? And then as you guys know, porcelain cracks and crumbles and shrinks, and the thing will ultimately topple and shatter, right? Or I would
And then the piece is over, right? Then your piece is gone.
And then then I clean it up and it's done, right?
Yeah.
So it's it's a moment in time, right? And so I have to remake these things every time I show them, right? Like in this case, this piece completely shatters, right? This is pretty old work at this time. I mean, it's still, if I get curating the shows or somebody wants them, I'll still show them. But this was the launching point for all the work I'm making now. Anything else?
No,
or do you want me to keep showing images?
So what do you work like? So where are you now?
So now, let me get rid of this. How do I get rid of this? Oh, stop share. So now, I've actually been thinking a lot about, even though I came out of ceramics, right, I've never been like a true object maker. And I think that, objects are kind of the foundation of ceramic as a material. And, I kind of a few years ago gave myself the challenge, asked myself the questions like, okay, can I just make a thing that's just like there and talks about all these interests that I have? And, I always kind of, my own kind of self-critique is like, am I doing these installations and this kind of ephemeral stuff as a trick? So I don't have to commit to this word or this phrase, right? And so I tasked myself to see if I could make objects that I'm happy with and that talk about all these interests. So I guess kind of like your Zoom glaze test, let's see if you can kind of see this stuff. So I just started, these are tests. God, the color's terrible. Basically melting these forms in the kiln, right? So that's a 4O.
Yeah.
Right, and thinking about them, getting a lot of glare there. It's like three-dimensional, in the round, and trying to do, even though in some, I'm overfiring these clay bodies and these glazes, doing quote unquote ceramics wrong, but ultimately using, really everything that's great about ceramics and everything that's beautiful about it to articulate some of these ideas, right? So right now, these are all, you know, in the tester phase, ooh, is that too bright?
No, that's when you hold it a little further back, that's good right there. Yeah.
Yeah, so XO, right? And you know, when I start to show them, you know, I'm trying to figure out, I want them to be in the round, right? So I wouldn't hang this on the wall because I want it to be an object. So you can see these negative spaces, and as this stuff kind of oozes through, and then how it kind of melts over. And then ultimately, these things are leading to longer phrases and words that will collapse into each other. I have one that didn't quite work. So this is one of the first ones where I start to kind of do words, right? And let's stack them on each other. And as I do that, it creates other technical problems. It kind of find the weak points, or yeah, you know, as to, you know, how it works. But it's, now that I've kind of got the basic technical stuff solved, I'm kind of fussing around the edges, and I feel like I'm pretty close to getting something at this scale to work. And then hopefully, you know, once I kind of get this scale down, kind of bump it up to another larger level. And then ultimately, again, trying to figure out a way to make this sit on a pedestal that it'll be in the round, right? So you can read it from all sides.
Of course, right.
So that's like literally, like I'm gonna glue this thing together today. But literally what I'm doing now in the studio.
Why do you think you keep coming back to ceramics as like the material that you're using for this stuff?
Because it can do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think because I went to 2 non-traditional ceramics programs, and I always came at the material sideways. And in terms of technical stuff, I always felt behind. So like always kind of catch up in terms of that. And in some ways, the further I was removed from school with all the kind of stuff, and like, you know, like when I showed you that image of the elephant on the tomato and the photograph, like I didn't have access to kilns, right? I didn't have access to glazes. And like, well, I can get this bag of clay, what can I make? And then I started, okay, you know, screwing around with it. And then, oh, like, I don't have a kiln, but I got this product photographer, like maybe he can be the transformational element in this work, right? And it made me think of the material in a really different way, right? And so the way I approach the materials, I hope, or I try, is kind of more from concept or from ideas. But ultimately, I keep coming back around, and I consciously try to leave the material, like, oh, but it can do this thing that no other material can do, right? And especially what I'm doing now, these surfaces and these treatments, it's kind of like some, you know, if you see these things someday, see these things in the real world, when we function like normal people, like they look like, some of them look like food, right? So I've actually had, you know, some of these in spaces, and I watch people go smell them, which is like super weird, right? And interesting, like weird, and like, wow, that's fucked up and cool. And you know, then like, oh, maybe I should make them out of food, and look at it always kind of, you know, maybe I will someday. But in this case, like ceramics allows me to make a static object that can evoke all these things. So I think sometimes what I get frustrated about, I love this material. I love the community, and ceramics people are always super nice, of course. But sometimes the community can be really like beholden to working with the material in one way, or talking about the material with one concept or one idea. And the reality is, this is a material that has 30,000 years of history that's completely and totally intertwined with human civilization, right? And you can conceptually, you can plumb the depths of this material and that history, and then technically, and again, I'm not a technician, but you can make it do all this stuff, right? That other materials can't, right? And the other materials just don't have that depth and heft. And I think, yeah, ultimately, to answer your question more succinctly, it's just super versatile, conceptually and technically.
It seems like it seems like it's always changing. There's always something that you have to do to tend to it, which, like, in seeing more of your work now, that seems to really fit nicely with these ephemeral concepts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, part of, like I said, I fell into ceramics because it was a cool program at Washington, right? And they never kind of, there was no dogma like ceramics has to be this. It's like, you're an artist and here's a cool material, go make stuff. And why don't you draw as well? Or why don't you use this other material? Like, we were never kind of locked into it. But I think, the material keeps opening up, and that process that you're talking about, I think, is definitely led me to these kind of ideas of ephemerality, because this material you have to tend to from beginning to end. Ultimately, we're all making time-based work. If you're working with this material, and now that I'm here, like, I can't get access, to the kilns at school. I'm like, oh man, I can't even finish these. I'm like, I'm really excited. I want to see this thing. So we're all kind of beholden to it.
Yeah.
What's really funny about, it's so bananas to think of making ceramics as time-based work. But it's so true. It's like ceramics is so long and we're so short.
Yeah.
It's such a crazy way to think about it.
Yeah, and it's...
I'm actually like, oh my God. I'm having like a fucking existential crisis.
I'm sorry, Cammie. I thought you were giving me therapy. But yeah, it's like, I think that's what's actually where one of the aspects of the material that's really exciting, is there's a lot of terrain to mine, literally in terms of the material, but just conceptually and historically, and that offers kind of a lot of opens a lot of doors for kind of poetics and concept. At least that's what I'm bugging my students about.
We teach beginning throwing, and it's just you're just like the conversation is so different when when you're teaching, like I teach hand building in one class and throwing in another class, and the conversations are so different. So it's kind of fun to just like step outside of like pottery for a second and kind of remember that ceramics is such a huge it's such a huge field, such a huge, like, vast landscape. So thank you so much.
No, it's what kind of to add to that, one of the things that was super illuminating for me was actually when my wife Alex and I did the European Work Center. Like, she's a total designer, art center at Cranbrook, and she's got a real job and all this stuff. And then having her work in the studio and this material, that at that point I'd worked with for 20 years or whatever, thought I knew what I was doing. Constantly reminded that I don't by the material. But kind of watching her approach the material from a designer's perspective, and the way she asked questions and solved problems. And I can throw pots, and sometimes I throw pots. I teach it, I enjoy it, but I don't do it unless I have to. But the way she thought about function and functionality, and kind of getting that out of the material was really illuminating for me. And then to kind of sit with her every day and kind of have these conversations in a way that I haven't really had to before. And like you said, Cammie, the other aspect of the vastness of the material is craft, design, art, right? And there's, it's this kind of three-legged stool. And that's what I loved about Cranbrook, is we had, that was real there. And I think all aspects of the conversation is super valid and super interesting, but you got to approach them on that design, craft, art on their terms. But then you can kind of play with the Venn diagram a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. Do you guys have any more? Do you have any other questions for Tom? I mean, I could do this all day, but
we can.
Yeah, maybe if anybody has any questions, if they should be able to unmute themselves if they want to ask.
I love questions.
Let's see.
No question.
I was blabbing through the whole tour.
What?
I was blabbing through the whole tour via text. So this has been such a great thing, because it's we're seeing a whole practice and really getting into the nuts and bolts. We're really able to like see a lot of what you're doing. So I loved it.
Thank you.
And Jen has a relationship as a designer with type as well. So I think, and ceramics, it's kind of fun. I'm glad that you are here to see it.
Yeah, I'm really into the type. Andres had shown me this work, I think even like last year, and I absolutely loved it. It's really fun to see how you did the rhino plasters. For me, I'm just looking at like the mechanics of things right now, but I love your practice that it includes so much, like that ceramics is the foundation of a kind of a serious arts practice, which there aren't, I don't know, kind of a serious conceptual arts practice too.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I mean, I think about that a lot. It's again, kind of, there's no reason it can't be, right? There's enough there, right? And it kind of depends on your starting point for your work or for an artist's work. If it's material first, then that's that, or if it's kind of ideas and concepts first. I mean, it can be both as well. But yeah, it's definitely, yeah, that's where it's coming from for me.
I think, what do you think, guys? Any final finalities for Tom?
No,
Actually,
yeah.
Amazing works, thanks, says Michelle.
Oh,
I feel like with both, maybe with the Hamilton's work, like there's a lot of like you guys, there's a lot of like overlaying, I think, between you, but just because like you guys don't use text, but I think there's a lot of like overlapping ideas. So I'm just saying, like, I don't know what I'm saying, but thanks so much.
Please come and visit us if we're ever able to travel again.
I would love to. Yeah, no, absolutely. I was actually there last year taking students. And it was the first time I did that with students, but if we get to go next year or someday, I would love to come see you guys in the real world.
That's great. Is that where you go with your grad students to visit galleries and studios? When
we did it last year was with undergrads, actually. And it was really, it's work, but it was an amazing trip, and it was great to get these kids from this town out to New York. I think it's really important for them to.
Yeah, this is a new thing that I'm just familiar with in the last 2 years of programs, like going on trips to New York to visit. And
yeah, it's the first. Our design department has done it every 2 years, but this last year was the first time the art department has, and so assuming we all get going again, I'm pretty sure we'll be back in probably next year. It's the kind of experience that the students talk about well beyond the actual trip, and having them get to compare the art scenes in LA and New York is. I think it's really important, and they're both so great, but they're so different from each other. They have such different personalities. So, but yeah, we'll be back. We'll come see you.
Yeah, let us know.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This visit was like really special to be able to see such like an extensive work /the gallery space is very cool. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. It's really great seeing you guys and getting to do it.
thank you.
Tom, I'll be whipping your ass on Words with Friends in about 5 minutes.
Don't get too cocky.
Hey, buddy.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Nice meeting you all. Thanks for coming.
Bye.